Good morning, David, in Shanghai. This is Addison in Baltimore. Your morning, my evening.
Hi.
So we're doing another one of our monthly updates, a sort of a Zoom letter from China, and a bunch of ideas we want to talk about. Probably what we should start off is just looking at sort of some kind of update on the last month. How's the pandemic doing in China?
The pandemic has been good in terms of things in Shanghai and generally in China. It's here I'm going about my day normally, and generally some places don't need masks, other places do, but people are pretty back to normal, I would say. Social distancing, I know, has been vogue in many places, and here some are and some aren't. It's just people have it's been like this for the last few months. I think people have started to get back to more normal routine, but I think the authorities definitely still have their guards up as the imported cases, like all the cases are imported from abroad.
That's amazing, because I think that since the pandemic started there, we outside China look there to see, when does this thing have an end? And if there's good news coming out of China, that gives probably all the rest of us hope.
Absolutely. Look, I was under lockdown in end of January, right, for 3-4 months. So I was in it before the rest of the world was. And if we can do it and come out earlier, then that is the great news for a great example for the rest of the world.
So when we look at the obviously the reason that we have this call with you is not only are you a professor of finance, but you also have your own aviation business. Just for listeners who don't know David, he's the chairman of China Aviation Valuation Advisors and Asia Aviation Valuation Advisors. So he knows of what he speaks from finance and aviation. So David, when we look at the commercial aviation within China, what's the word there in terms of traffic, in terms of how the airlines are trying to make a comeback? And of course, what about deliveries? Are they still going to grow, or are they shrinking?
Look, I guess first off on deliveries, in China, the airlines are still taking deliveries. They have not deferred as much as other airlines around the world, who have predominantly either deferred or have taken a pause in deliveries, etc. So that's what we've seen so far. So that's a good news. On the order side, there's really not much to say at this point. Everyone's kind of taking a look at what's going on. Only a few bits on that, not from here, but really from Europe, as you see the latest, the MAX delivery, right? The very small delivery. And now it's not called the MAX anymore. It's 737-8.
Right. So what about traffic? Is there traffic pickup?
Yes, the traffic side has actually picked up. China, in terms of the passengers, have pretty much come back to normal pre-COVID days, and same on scheduled capacity side. And there has been, I took some flights domestically in China, and that has really picked up. The number of passengers who are coming back, some are, the pricing is very, very low. So pricing that I've seen on just anecdotal basis and what I've seen basis is basically around almost about a third of what it was pre-COVID days. So that's kind of giving a sense. And there's a lot of these pay-as-you-go ticket packages, so that people can go as much as they want on an unlimited basis.
That's amazing, because what we're seeing in the US is fare wars but people are just not coming back to fly as much. We're seeing that the traffic pickup is just not gaining any kind of momentum.
Yeah, so I think in that and that's I think that's a bit different in China's case, right? I think for most, people are wearing masks. They can't really social distance or block middle seats because there is quite a decent load factors. But the revenue numbers, the top line numbers will be much lower. So I think the main emphasis now is how to get people back on the planes first, and then try to build that up. Well, so that's going to be an issue.
Right. So what we're seeing, of course, in the US is the start of mass layoffs. Now, at the moment, they're announcing layoffs, right? But will the federal government step in and do more bailout? Obviously, if you have good load factors and low revenues, at least you've got the infrastructure working. So that's another sort of light in the dark for us all to look at.
Absolutely. Look, I think if you're just having everything paused and not being utilized, it's not good for everyone. It's not good for the economy, the network effects, etc. I think you mentioned the bailout in the U.S. and I would say that bit is a bit different, structurally speaking, and with the industry. During these past few months when it was really bad in China, people were put on furlough. People were put on basic salaries. I don't know if you understand that there's a mechanism where you can put on, you have basic salaries and then you have a lot of other bonus tiers back to your normal salary. So that's structurally in the industry, it's very different than in the US and other economies, right? Every country is a bit different.
Right.
So that actually almost enabled people to save costs on a mass level, significant level. So that's been what's happening, and especially in the aviation world, where the pilots and crew, accrue bonuses or other per diems, right, as they fly more. So that's also kind of a variable cost. So that airlines have been able to save on that as well. So those are kind of a couple, I would say, big differences compared to, say, in the U.S., where that wage flexibility is not as much.
Right. Basically. It's interesting the way you describe that, because it sort of almost alludes to the whole political economy difference between China and, let's say, the U.S., where we probably have, in a weird way, we have more structural inflexibility in respect to this particular conundrum.
It's just how the economy has been built up. So I think in general it's an adjustment in progress, I guess is the best way to put it. So we'll see what happens on the U.S. side in the end of September, when this first CARES package for aviation expires, and what the next steps are. So,
David,
I'm sure this will be a last minute.
What is your sense? I don't know if CAAC, what the most recent CAAC number is, but what is your sense of load factor system-wide, domestically?
There's a laggy number on that, and what I can feel from my estimations, I would say it's actually roughly around about the 70% mark. So it's not in general. So it's actually, and when I say that, remember the international traffic is completely down for the most part.
This is inside.
It's still at 15% of. It's still 15% of pre-COVID days. So you just almost have to ignore that piece of the business.
Right. But the thing is that if you're finding that you've got 70% load factors at 1/3 of the price, the next step is to start ratcheting up that pricing to try and keep these companies viable. Have you seen?
Absolutely. And
have you seen any price moves?
Not yet. Not yet. What I've seen, there's small increments and adjustments, of course. But I know for a fact that a lot of the airlines themselves have been taking additional debt, capital, and other means to kind of raise capital as well to sustain themselves. So these are I guess they're still in the pre-days of trying to figure out how to get back to
Right.
a more sustainable footing.
Any talk in China of the government stepping in with industry support, as has happened in so many other places?
In terms of just pure cash handouts, no. The government has been actually in the beginning, even the beginning was basically, so what they were doing, giving bonuses or subsidizing when flights weren't happening. And this, if you think about this type of method, this is, the government was doing this even pre-COVID days, and to basically enhance traffic into less traveled places, such as the west parts of China, right, where there was not as much traffic. So by either the local governments or national kind of planning authorities. So this method is not uncommon here, and they continue to kind of do it, and it's a way to kind of it's a way to kind of bring back demand. So I don't see any direct kind of bailout type like the U.S. for example,
Right.
But I do see this sort of thing continuing.
Right. Now, when we look at, like you mentioned earlier, that international travel is really it's on the other side of weak. What does it look like for bubbles and travel bubbles beyond China? Is that something that is being explored?
Yeah, so I guess first I'll say what's happening in China. There is some bubble passages that are being talked about, but really on the business side of things at the moment. So with Singapore and with some other countries that have low instances, the tourist side of things hasn't really started. So if you take that case and you see what's happening in other Asian countries, I'll give you an example. Singapore as an example. They have been also doing this. They had a resurgence of COVID, but they seem to have controlled that now. And they have tried to open up bubbles on the business side with smaller economies as test cases nearby to try to see if this will work. And if that works, then they're going to expand it to other places. So with tourists as well. So this is kind of their kind of slow reopening of using this travel bubble concept. But other than that, I haven't seen as many as developments as say in Europe, where there seems to be a lot more talk of this type of style of development.
It's actually amazing when you think about it that for the first time probably ever, the world has to learn from the world. What works, what to try, how do you experiment. Literally everybody is in this to try and figure out. It's like, the network trying to, where is their progress? How do we experiment? What do we do to learn? And it's going painfully slowly, because certainly for commercial aviation, the infrastructure is massively oversized for the amount of traffic. And how do you sustain that infrastructure? As you point out, when it goes, you can't just bring it back, right? And China seems to be very good at keeping the airlines, or somehow making the airlines stay viable.
I think this goes down to controlling, if you can say that, about the virus itself, right? If you can have people be more comfortable doing that, then they'll be more willing, hopefully, to propensity to travel.
Right.
And this goes to, I guess, the issue of the talks of various vaccines that are being under development around the world.
Right.
And I would say that, look, if this, I would call it can we say, miracle vaccine, but I would just say, look, if there's a vaccine, any vaccine that's tested and thoroughly tested is a good thing, and it will definitely bring confidence to people.
Right.
I think the issue is with many of these vaccines, it's always about the level of efficacy. So what percent is it effective? It's not all 100% effective. So that's kind of, you just have to see what kind of range of efficacy that it has. So, and that's kind of the different methodologies that's been talked about. You know, there's ones in the UK that's been pretty good. You talk here about the one in Russia that's going on, and then the ones in China. So, one thing that these drugs under development, these vaccines it's about testing it on people and seeing it on a clinical trial basis.
Right.
I think there's a big difference between testing on a small population and a big population. So designing of these tests is actually really important. So I think, again, like most things, the devil's in the details,
right?
Not just flashy.
What can you tell us about the vaccine development in China?
Sure. There's one very, very advanced stage one and it's in conjunction with a lot of the military in terms of the testing phases. So it's gone through the testing, and it's pretty far advanced in terms of testing. So it seems like it's going to come out relatively soon, but I don't know. So these are still going to the final phases. Right. So when this thing does come out, then the question is, from my point of view, is how do you roll it out in large amounts, and even if you do, then the question is again back to efficacy, as well as then about who and how should be taking it, and to spread that as well.
Right.
So but this again, I think any progress towards this is a good thing. I think so. Then the question is about sharing the knowledge globally, like you said a bit earlier.
The thing that what's so alarming about the pandemic is that it's been politicized everywhere. It's just so strange to me that politicians whoever's in power is to blame, and whoever in the opposition is full of great ideas of how they would have done differently. And it seems like smoke and mirrors to me. It's like two children fighting over something, which is just so asinine. That's just my 5 cents opinion on this. It's really quite awful. You recently did an article in Forbes about pricing, which I think we'd like to hear you talk about.
Absolutely. It's there has been some very different dynamics today in terms of aircraft pricing that we haven't seen in I would say even pre-COVID, since GFC, Great Financial Crisis periods, and then before that, 9/11. Those are the big spikes in our industry previously. So if you look at it, what's going on is there is a ton of aircraft being parked, of course, because of the demand side is very low. But if you think about it from that point of view, this has affected a lot on what the airlines have been bringing back are the new technology aircraft, the newer. So this pricing difference between older technology and newer technology is getting bigger. That kind of divide, and then the same thing goes with wide bodies versus narrow bodies, right? The narrow bodies are getting brought back first. Smaller aircraft are getting brought back in use first. Right. And that part makes sense, because if you think about it, wide bodies are predominantly on international routes, right? Long distance, long haul routes. And there's not as much long haul traffic as short haul traffic. Right. So that part makes sense. So the utilization is still low on that side. And something to say, if you I don't know if you saw the latest delivery. So in July, the Airbus didn't have any wide body deliveries, which is amazing actually.
Right.
So they only had narrow bodies. So this kind of goes, I guess, a data point to support this kind of these kind of figures.
Right.
And other things that I think is quite interesting is the fact that are these what's happening with basically all these kind of ABS structures, this bank financing structures, right? If you think about the different structures that are underlying all of aviation, it's financing. Mm-hmm. This is asset heavy, heavily levered, or generally high levered industry. So banks are in the back, or financiers in the back. At the moment, there's a lot of deferrals going on, and this liquidity is getting just kind of pushed back. So the pricing is still lagging, hasn't really caught up to what's in reality, what the pricing is. The current deals that are being done are things that were negotiated way before, that can't be stopped.
Right.
So it's more of a continuation of deals of completion. New deals are much less. And so if you think about it, that means transaction liquidity has come down. That means banks are just reassessing where they are in terms of their own portfolio and new deals that they're considering. Same goes with investors and leasing companies. Some have been doing some major transactions, but for the most part, people have been kind of carefully assessing where they are with their portfolios and new deals basically in the horizon. So this kind of bid-ask spread. So the people who want to sell aircraft and the people who want to buy aircraft has gotten bigger
right.
over time. So this disconnects. So and this is very akin to other asset classes and other things, especially in times of distress. This pandemic is one example. So you see this, and this is getting exacerbated because over 25 airlines now have gone bankrupt or have filed for some sort of restructuring around the world, and these numbers keep going up more.
Right.
But then this is all kind of due to that what we mentioned before, the low lack of demand, and then the inherent cost of the infrastructure that's already in place.
Right.
So what I'm seeing is really kind of soon enough, the banks will be in a position to kind of say, hey, what do we want to do? Because they're almost the ones right now, the lessors are giving a lot of rent deferrals, holidays for airlines for those aircraft.
Right.
But how long can you do that for?
Correct. It's like the unlimited funding that the central banks have been putting in place.
That's exactly a good analogy, because basically what you're doing is, even with the bailouts, is you're pushing the decision back, right? Fundamentally, if there's no demand, if you can bail out as much as you want, but that's not gonna, until the demand comes back, you're in the same position, just pushing things back.
Right.
So time will tell, but basically this is where eventually the banks will have to make a call on whether they want to continue this or they want to make other arrangements as well. And that's kind of thing where there will be a big spike in terms of the pricing differences. So these are kind of really kind of things that, by the way, that are kind of emphasized and shown through the data from my upcoming book, Aircraft Valuation, Airplane Investments as an Asset Class, and where I look at 20 plus years of values data and seeing how the lag periods between the previous kind of shocks have been to the system.
Right.
So this is not new per se, but the scale is very high,
right.
Unprecedented, as many people say. But that's there's going to be a lot of dynamics coming up in the next 3 to 6 months for sure.
Right.
In the dynamics here.
David, one of the things that occurs to me as you're saying this, two things actually pop up. Number one is the fact that, particularly in the wide bodies, all 777s, all 330s, that I think from most or if not most, then many of them, that's a one-way trip. Because by the time international travel comes back, those airplanes are going to be in the desert for maybe a year or 2 or 3. And for those airplanes that were, let's say, already 20 years old, there's no point in bringing that airplane back. So whoever is holding the paper on those airplanes is going to take a serious haircut, because you're not going to want the engine parts from that airplane, because like you were saying, what's hot right now is flexibility and new. The second part of what I'm thinking about when you were telling me this thinking about your, and we should talk a bit about your book, is the fact that we had a conversation with the CEO of Helvetic in Zurich, and they just took delivery of another E2, and they've actually switched up from E190s E2s to E195 E2s. And two things about that, the recent delivery was amazing. They flew this little airplane, and look, it's a 110-seater. From Natal in Brazil, nonstop to Zurich, and I think they had 30 or 40 minutes extra fuel when they landed in Zurich. Now, why is that important? He also mentioned to us that they did a repatriation flight for Swiss citizens from Central Africa to Switzerland with an E2, E190 E2. Those are long-legged airplanes. And I think that if we see that as, let's say, bubbles start to grow, and you pointed out that, countries are experimenting within close by, so to speak, and small airplanes that have got the range is going to become a very, very important feature for a lot of operators, because it's going to allow that flexibility. So the E2 and the A220, I think, are going to be they're going to have a good pandemic. I think that's what I'm learning from this.
Yeah, no, I think in terms of smaller aircraft, because of the demand side of things, they're going to be more preferred, right? You don't want to run a huge aircraft if you're not, the demand side, there's not that many people going to be on it, right? That doesn't make sense economically. And you might do it for other reasons, such as keeping your routes and other things, your cruise current, which is what I've seen a lot of times. People are still running these larger aircraft because they need to keep their pilots still certified, right?
It's interesting you mentioned that Korean Air was flying their 380 from Seoul to Seoul just to keep the pilots current. Can you imagine what that must cost? The 380, no passengers, just pilots, keeping themselves current. I think it's staggering when you realize the cost of keeping this infrastructure current and active. You've got incredible talent that comes with humongous rules and regulations to keep it safe. It's the cost of the structure is massive, and absent a flow of revenue through it to try and offset this, it's frightening when you realize you can kick the can down the road, but for how long?
No, that's absolutely right. And given what's happening, the entire kind of infrastructure shows the fixed nature of the infrastructure, high costing. If it continues, if there's long periods of this low demand, the industry is not in a position to kind of sustain this. And there will be needs massive types of restructurings to basically more align the cost structures, as you see, with the lower demand, if that's the case. So, I know everyone's hoping that demand will pick back up, and then we don't need to worry as much about that. But in case it doesn't, that's kind of what we're going to see. And this is why all these airlines, like I mentioned, over 25 airlines are in the restructuring phases. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? So I've been writing about this since basically beginning of February with op-eds, because I was in this earlier, right? So I saw a lot of this kind of dynamics while the rest of the world was still doing relatively okay at that time. So, but these are long issues that will definitely continue as we we go on in our industry for sure.
Wow, David, it's firstly, it's good to catch up with you and hear that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. I think everybody in this industry globally is desperate for that kind of news. But the fact that it's going to be still inside a bubble for large economies like China or like the United States, where there's a sufficient domestic traffic to sustain most of that infrastructure. You know, in the States, for example, the system is designed to move 2.5 million people a day. We're at like 500,000, 560, 700,000. I mean, it bounces around. But, you know, the last number I looked at this week, we were at 21% of capacity. It's 80% too big. And you know what's going to go. I mean, they've already taken the planes out. Now what next is the people. So I think that we're all desperate for good news, desperate for good news. So it was good to catch up and hear some good news from you.
No, look, there is positive aspects for sure. And there is words of additional caution, I guess. So the way I see it. And as we continue with this, one thing I emphasize and I say in the articles, look, while it might be bad for some folks, there'll be really good opportunities for others. So, and there is investors who are on the sidelines waiting and seeing about this. So to me, these are opportunities for people who are bold to take into more actions and be able to basically get on this. So there is opportunity and there is light in the tunnel. I think from my point of view, like most markets, from a markets point of view, the faster restructuring or mark to market happens in terms of actual reality, then the faster we get out of it and into the next higher plateau. Right. Because if you think about it, what does these bailouts do generally? Yes, there's all sorts of effects. But generally what it does is, from an economic point of view, is it pushes the decision back, right? It slows down this kind of what natural markets would come down to. Right. So at the moment, this is where we are. I know there's lots of other externalities and other kind of factors involved, but so at the end of the day, my hope is that we as an industry kind of get our heads into it so we can kind of move on to the next level, next stage. So that's kind of my hope.
David, it's always good to talk to you, and hopefully we'll be chatting at the end of September.
Thank you very much for having me again. Yeah, no, this is great. And I hope to I'm sure we'll have another fruitful discussion then.
Thank you.